Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. Today's interview is for pharmacists by pharmacists. So if you care about what it means to be a successful leader, whether in the pharmacy world or otherwise, you're probably going to care about today's discussion. If you're in medical affairs and you're wondering what are your pharmacy colleagues doing, you're probably going to care about today's discussion. Our guest today has been a guest with us more than a few times. He is the Chief Pharmacy Officer for the Community Care Cooperative, Cooperate, serving in prior roles as a chief officer and senior executive at multiple healthcare organizations. We've been lucky enough to have him on before, and he's shared many points of wisdom for us. So I'm really excited for this. You can please reach out, leave a comment, please subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. You can always find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks. Go to my website, darshantalks.com. You can also reach our guest, Tom Siepka, at his email address, and I'm flashing it on the screen right now, tsiepka@c3aco.org. I'm really excited to have him. He's actually changed roles recently, so that's really exciting. The company's so lucky to have him. So our guest today, Tom Siepka. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Darshan. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for coming on. So let's jump right into it, right? Mm-hmm. So our topic for today is about the essentials of pharmacy leadership. And you've been a leader for several years now. Could you talk to us a little bit about your journey from being what I always think of myself as the lowly pharmacist, front lines, struggling, and you're looking at what people see as the middle management and then like senior leadership in pharmacy. What was your journey like going from a pharmacist all the way up to senior leadership?
I mean, it's a great question and a long conversation, right? So I think most pharmacists start off with technical expertise, right? Either clinically or maybe in IT or in supply chain. So pharmacists usually get out, we come out of pharmacy school, generally educated, and depending career paths we take will dictate that a bit. But most of the time people start off that way and then have opportunities. Well, you're really good at IT or you're really good at putting the schedule together, for the staff. And we struggle with that. Do you want to look at being a manager? So usually jumping into then middle management roles, right? Built off of being a good pharmacist, a good coworker, and working with that. And I think that's an interesting jump because when you make that jump, you no longer sometimes a coworker versus a boss, right? So some people have difficulty with that, but then you're always managing the process. Right. So you're managing the policies, procedures, you're managing to regulatory requirements, and usually in the middle management role, making sure the day-to-day operations of the organization you're working for, either a retail pharmacy or a hospital pharmacy or really any other job, right, happens every day.
Right.
And then I think the next big leap up. Go ahead.
No, you're talking generalities, and I really want to get into the generalities, but I want to hear your story first. Because you want to then connect that to the generalities.
Yeah.
So talk to me about you.
Okay. So I was
modest.
Yeah. So started off being, a lowly bench pharmacist at a hospital, filling cassettes. We didn't have any automated cabinets and, working weekends, night, holidays, making IVs, doing everything that needed to happen in the pharmacy. And then got an opportunity. One of the organizations I was working at, the pharmacy leader was leaving, very small organization, right? I think we had, like 5 people in the pharmacy, right, in total. So we had like a pharmacy manager, director, myself as a full-time pharmacist, another pharmacist, per diem pharmacist, and a tech or two, and that was it. And he was leaving, and I was helping. In that type of environment, you get your hands into everything. And I had worked at a larger hospital before that, and the person was leaving. It's like, hey, Tom, have you ever thought about being the pharmacy manager? And I said, why? Right? Like, Joint Commission comes in, all these people are, demanding of things. And he asked me a question, and he said, well, would you be happy if they hired someone that wasn't really a good leader here for the department and its people? I said, yeah, that might be detrimental. Obviously, he saw in me some abilities maybe I didn't see at that point in time. So, I got an opportunity. So I became the pharmacy leader there. And that was like my first opportunity to be like a pharmacy director. Prior to that, I was more of a clinical pharmacist, a great individual contributor, worked well with my colleagues, but that was kind of my first foray into that, and I said, well, I might as well try it. And because if we got somebody horrible, it could be a horrible working experience. So that was my first foray. And then it was the insight of saying, do I want to stay at an organization that only had a few pharmacy people, right? And it was a transitional hospital, that we worked in. So it was in between a regular hospital environment where most of my background was, and more of a outpatient ambulatory center. So it was this like hybrid world. So and I decided I needed to work on education at the same time. So I was working on my doctorate in pharmacy then, because I was convinced I was going to be a clinically minded pharmacist, do rotations, things like that, and be an intensivist was my goal. So I went to another organization to be the clinical leader. So I went from being a general pharmacy leader to a bigger organization, just being in charge of clinical programs, and I flourished there. Right, I was still doing my PharmD work, flourished, and started up clinical rounding for pharmacy where it didn't happen before. Started up ICU rounds, things like that. Got pharmacy more integrated in it, and started to develop more of a love for overall pharmacy management versus just clinical. So a little bit of an evolution for me, where I thought I was going to be much more clinical. I started blending over and becoming much more administrative. And it's, about that time too, the pharmacy schools flipped to all PharmDs, right? So when I first went in for my PharmD to get it, it was, I want to say, old school, right? You graduated pharmacy school 5 years with a bachelor's, though we always argued it should have been a master's with 5 years, but it wasn't. And you went another 2 years after that to get your doctorate in pharmacy, your PharmD. So the school switched to a 6-year program to graduate everyone with a PharmD, which was an entry-level degree. So that was probably a critical time for me when I said, do I want to spend this extra money and get an entry-level degree, which I already have? Or do I want to, because I was leaning more and more into leadership at that point in my life. And I said, okay, I'm going to concentrate more. And that's kind of when I went down the road and went for more of a master's in leadership, healthcare administration route, which is what I got. So, that had kind of moved forward. And I was actually then consulting for a period of time when we got a large client in the Boston area, and I was working with them, and they needed a pharmacy leader. So I had worked with them for a bit, had little kids, was traveling a lot. They loved working with me. I was providing them lots of guidance and insight. And this is after I had, secured another director of pharmacy job in my career. And I came on, and that was a great organization where I had the opportunity to grow quite a bit. So was one of the larger hospitals in the region, in the New England area, well-known organization with very advanced clinics and care. And it was my first real opportunity to be a pharmacy leader at a larger organization with a complex department, clinical programs, ambulatory programs, retail pharmacy there, specialty, with our inpatient pharmacy, more than one location in the network. So that was an opportunity. I spent almost 10 years there, like a little over, about 8 to 9 years there, and went from pharmacy and became, at the end of my career there, a leader outside of pharmacy. So I got the opportunity to be an executive director at a medical center within the health system. And I was brought to the table to help with mergers and acquisitions we were doing. So the first one, they had me just work on pharmacy. The second one, I was in my other role more. So I was more of an executive director of our ambulatory center, kind of like a COO type role, but a smaller place. And I actually got to work on ED, pharmacy, and lab as part of the merger with another organization. So it was my first opportunity to kind of step out of like a pharmacy role. And that's when I realized everything I knew about leadership was built on the leadership experiences. The pharmacy piece was just technical expertise. So I felt a little exposed at times, because being a pharmacy expert, you could always dig into pharmacy expertise, right, on different work and initiatives. When I was the executive director of hospital services at that organization, it was all leadership, right? It was not pharmacy expertise that brought me into that role. It was the leadership. And that's when I kind of reflected on the growth I did as a leader. And during that journey too, is when I finished my master's in leadership work. So that, I think, also helped me broaden my vision a bit and understand the importance of leadership components, right? Not just being a technical expert, which is kind of where I genesised from and moved along a bit in pharmacy. like, well, he's a really good pharmacist, so if so facto, he'll be a good pharmacy leader. And that's not always true. Just like anything, right? You have somebody really good at computers. Are they going to be a good, chief information officer? Maybe not, right? They could be very good at computers and have a different role. So, that was my journey. And that kind of then got me into being a chief pharmacy officer at a few organizations.
So
that experience.
It's funny you say that. So I'm just listening to your journey, and I took some notes, and I know you have prepared a list of 5 essential leadership qualities, but I'm going to tell you, based on just hearing you, here are the leadership qualities I took away from just your journey. And I'd love to compare that to the list you came up with. So I think that would be an interesting discussion to have. But the first one was when you started off as a leader in a small organization, and your option was, do I say yes to this change in role from being an individual contributor to really managing? And that saying yes is such a difficult decision. Do I know what I'm talking about? That initial jump, trusting yourself, that saying yes, if you will, was kind of a big thing that popped out to me about your journey. The second thing that popped out to me was why you said yes, which was, if I don't say yes, someone else might come in here and my team will suffer. So a leader is not just looking out for how do I get ahead, but I mean, hopefully that happens anyways, but really you're looking out for how do I take my team and move further ahead, because I can only succeed if my team succeeds with me. And I think that perspective is important. The comfort of seeing your team is important. The next piece in your leadership journey that really stuck out to me was when you talked about the integration with the rest of the organization, integrating your pharmacy functions with other organizations, with the rest of the organization. So now that you've said that you trust yourself, what you started talking about was, how do I help others trust me? Mm-hmm. And for that, you have to have that reach out function. And that's another element of essential pharmacy leadership. But it's not just, as you said, it's not just about pharmacy. It's about anything. You first need to trust yourself, then you need to have others start trusting you. And as part of that, what you mentioned was this idea of being flexible, of trying things and failing at things, and then trying them again in a new way, in a different way. And that all of that was sort of a recipe for growth. And that connection, that bringing everything together, was the number 4 for me about your journey in seeing the essentials of pharmacy leadership. And then the number 5, which has been consistent so far, whether you were talking about your PharmD or I assume it's an MBA you talked about at the end, where you said it's a master's in leadership, if you will, but some version of that. But either way, education was a critical component of that journey for you. How have I done in terms of?
Pretty good. I mean, I went so my master's actually is in leadership with a concentration in healthcare administration. So, yeah, I mean, I think you took away a lot of the high points there. And, one of the first things I had, and it's related to the comments that you made, is be aware of your own leadership style and strengths and also weaknesses, right? So I think as you step in as a leader and you decide to say yes when someone asks you, right? And that was a big decision moment. I really lamented about it because you had many of my friends and colleagues that were very happy, in clinical positions and just working as a pharmacist. And I said, you know what, there's an opportunity here to allow the department to meet that mission. If I become the leader, I want to make sure that can happen. I want to make sure our pharmacists can deliver the care that I know they can, that we can make the difference in patients' lives. So, but when you come in as a leader and I think you made a comment that hopefully people go in for the right reasons, right? Not just moving careers forward. I'll leave that up to interpretation. I think many of the people in the audience can comment on that. There are many leaders that might have a different view, right? And look for advancement opportunities first and try to do leadership second. And I think you're right. You have to be bigger, be part of bigger something than yourself, right? Really be tied to kind of mission and organization. That's like a Disneyism too. Like I did some time at the Disney Management Institute, and it is, I think when you're part of something bigger and you contribute and you're part of that, I think that's when you can have a rewarding career, not just as a leader, but also as a pharmacist or an individual worker in an organization, right? And contributor. But, and when I talk about strengths in leadership and weaknesses, the best illustration I saw of this in a leadership book that I let someone borrow and never got back. So I have to go buy myself another copy, but they basically illustrated it as a tent held up by different poles. Right. So it's a great way to kind of look at leadership, and what you want is an even tent. Right. And all of us have different, strengths and weaknesses. For me, it is listening sometimes. Right. That's something I always have to work on. And, I'm very extroverted. Right. So I kind of have to know that about myself to be an effective leader. I can talk. Right. And I want to have the opportunity to listen so I get feedback so I can understand the challenges and things. So that's an example of keeping your tent pole even, right? So it's really, taking stock of that and understanding that. But also when working with teams, and this is kind of careful balance, is a lot of leaders will come in and say, especially as a leader, well, I have to have all the answers. I'm the leader. I have to fix problems. I have to make things better. It's all my responsibility. I have, responsibility and accountability for these things. But you could be going off in the wrong direction and not really fixing the actual problem. So it is allowing for opportunities of discussion. And I think twofold, right? You talked about it before when I was working within the healthcare organization and emerging organizations and departments. It is important for you to collaborate and listen to people that, in a sense, are your colleagues, but also customers, right? If you want to look at it that way, and understanding what their true needs are, maybe in an acquisition, what their fears are, right? Companies coming in, well, who's the lead company? There's usually one that is taking more of a lead in a merger acquisition. But, allowing for input and discussion. And always, one of my isms too is to always be able to have conversations in the room, because I would say the ones outside of the room will kill you, right, as a leader. So if people don't feel comfortable to share input and really talk about the issues at hand within a meeting, you're never going to really move forward as an organization. And you're not going to move forward as a leader well. So, but on the other side of that, you can't have rule by committee, right? Not everything is group think and group decision making, because if everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge, right? So, so I really think that is like another ism or point, and I think essential leadership is allowing for those opportunities. And then kind of doing checkbacks, when you come up with plans and discussions and you gain input, people will take note of that, but they'll also take note of if they never hear anything ever again. Right. So I remember being in organizations where we would bring consulting groups in, and people used to call it the flavor of the month, right? People come in, we're going to launch on this big initiative. Leadership would get all excited about it. We have 1 or 2 meetings, and then it would all like evaporate and disappear after a period of time. And, and then the organization's struggling with something else, they bring another group in and launch on something. So I think it's being mindful of these things and committing to those processes is really important, or you're going to lose the team, right? Because essentially as a leader, I mean, if you're the only one in the building, it'd be a giant building with one person and you're not going to accomplish much, right? So you need a dedicated and talented team, and need to take advantage of all of the people that are within the team and the skills and abilities. You as a leader serve a role as a leader. It is important, but not drastically more important than any other key position on that team that you're going to rely on, right, to move projects forward, to provide care to patients. If you're a leader, if you don't have clinicians, you're not going to care for any patients, right? So it's really working with that group and understanding their needs so you can make them successful and move forward. But in it, there has to be some direction, like a ship, right? So there has to be what's the direction? What's the vision? And I think when someone asked me the difference between a manager and a director, and I said, well, a manager will manage to the policies. The director writes the policies and provides the vision and direction, right? That's a key difference. And some people can't make that jump, and that's okay, right? Everybody has a role and has different strengths. And not everybody is cut out to be a senior leader. And sometimes you don't want to, right? Like I feel like some of the senior leadership positions in organizations have short time frames these days, with changes. So sometimes that comes with risk, but people really need to know where they're going also feel part, you need to feel part of that process. So I think that vision and direction, regardless if it's pharmacy, could be a law firm, it could be a manufacturing plant, right? I know what are we doing? I come in, I work every day and I work hard, but what are we working towards? What are our goals, right? What are we trying to strive to? And it has to be real, right? Like, and it has to be something that can be executed on and tangible, right? Because another ism I have, and I think people say, no, vision without execution is like hallucination or delusion, right? You can have all these grand plans, but if there's nothing there, right? Those plans aren't going to happen. And the people that you're trying to lead are going to be like, I don't know what this person's doing. This is like pie in the sky. It's all really good, but there's nothing there, right? That is of substance. So, yeah, I think those are some initial ones. I don't know if you have some comments on that, but as I think about the journey and those key points, those come to me as some key essentials.
But to me, those are really interesting, and I'm kind of going. My experience with my life has been that when the student is ready, the master will appear, and I've always interpreted that sentence or saying or ism to really mean. There have been loads of lessons I've learned along the way, but I feel like I've heard those same lessons multiple times before. The day it really took was when it applied to me, or I was mentally in a space where I could accept those lessons. As a leader, I assume a huge part of what you do is mentorship. When does that mentorship for you start? Is it with the students and their IPPs and APPs, or is it with the pharmacists who are still in their essential roles? Or, and by the way, Lydia is reaching in saying, thanks for your many wise observations about leadership. So
thanks, Lydia.
Thank you, Lydia. So my question for you is, when do you start leading and creating that next generation of leaders?
I think the answer is almost always, right? Depending on the circumstances that you're in. And everybody learns, everybody keeps learning. And there's so many books out there. There's the 5 essentials of this or that. So I'm sure everybody can read up all different ideas on this. This is just kind of what I've kind of bucketed into. And I have 2 more at the end that I'll share, right? Because I got to complete the 5 to meet the billing, Darshan. But I feel like there were times when I was a leader where we had formal student rotations. So not only was I mentoring, say, and great, case study or example, colleague of mine that I've worked with a few times, started with me as a clinical director, came to me as an associate director that I mentored. I moved on to another organization. He ascended into my role as the leader of pharmacy at that organization, and now sits as the chief pharmacy officer at a great organization in New England here. And for me, that's like a proud moment because hopefully he's way smarter than me now too, right? That's what you hope for. But and I think he is. He's a really smart guy. But so there was that type of mentorship that I had through my career, where sometimes people would work with me a few different times. Right. And I think what happens in that instance where you get to mentor is people will sometimes seek you out too. So people work for people more than they work for organizations at times.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, the organization's important. It's like, Tom's a great guy, but there's like nobody at this organization. They're going out of business. I probably won't go there. Right. So I think the organization has a factor. There has to be opportunity, but so there are times where you can work with someone over time and get to progress professionally with them and move on. I think one of the key things for me in my development is I had a mentor, different mentors at times. And sometimes very hard to have your boss be your mentor, right? Yeah. So it takes the right type of boss to have as a mentor. Not always possible. So sometimes you need to seek out a mentor for you that is not your boss. So I had one that I worked with that was at Lowell General, and he's in a healthcare organization now. And he provided great opportunity for me when I worked for him, and the sound advice as a mentor when I didn't. Similar, with one at the Leahy Health System here in New England too. Someone that was there that had left the organization that I stayed in touch with for a while, and would bounce ideas and thoughts too. And that's a great relationship for development because you can get some honest feedback, right? Again, about being aware, you have to be open as a leader, right? Because nobody's perfect. Nobody is, right? And there's always opportunities to kind of grow, but that type of mentor relationship, I was able to do that a few times and mentor someone, and I was the mentee at times. And I think that is a healthy thing to do. So yes, we had IPPY students. I had residents in leadership rotation that worked on projects with me. And then I had, colleagues within the departments and areas I got to learn, work with, where I learned and had the opportunity to mentor folks. And hopefully I provided good mentorship to them, right? Hopefully they're not sitting here going to write a nasty note. Time wasn't that good. But, it is really trying to provide that. And what I always told people that we're looking to develop as leaders is you're always observing, right? So I feel as a leader, you're always on stage, and people watch you and your actions. And I remember in my journey, I would see leaders and say, wow, this person, what a great leader. And I would take notes mentally, sometimes, actual notes about the way they handle different things or did things. And these are things I want to mimic or espouse or modify and bring into my leadership. And then there's leaders you watch and say, I will never, ever do that. Right? So that's a great example of how I will not be a leader. Right. And I think as a mentor or mentee process, you do that. Actually, when I did my master's in leadership, one of the things that I developed for the organization was a formal mentorship program. So I worked with American College of Healthcare Executives, looked at a couple of organizations, healthcare organizations that were putting together leadership development, and put up a formal mentorship program, with recommended meetings, structure, everything. Because, some people can just do this. And some people say, well, how can I be an effective mentor to a mentee? Or, organization, has superstars in their organization. You're saying this is such an outstanding employee. They have potential. How can we support that person to move forward and grow as a leader? Some of it is formally, like saying, hey, you know what? Go back to school, get an MBA, get a master's degree to kind of, get your foundation strong. Some of it is internal opportunities and projects and things like that to expand their bandwidth. And I think mentorship is another key area. So that educational piece, I'm a big believer in. I think you can learn a lot more there. And in a mentee mentorship, you're more in the real world, right? Not in the classroom. So I think that can be pretty valuable.
It's funny. I'm going to actually have a conversation with my mentor in 2 days, actually, or 3 days. She's going to be on the podcast. I'm excited for that. So I hope to have a deeper dive into exactly this conversation. I do want to actually add on one more thing. Lydia has another question for us.
Sure.
Could you comment on how you lead healthcare change in quality improvement situations where stakeholders have strong personalities, preconceived notions, and sometimes conflicting agendas?
Well, I got a great story in that where when I came in as a consultant to that organization that actually then hired me, is that we were trying to put in a barcode scanning system, right, to improve medication safety. And there was a lot of apprehension with that, concerns about, talk about preconceived notions. This is going to slow down nurses, right? And that was a big concern because, we usually didn't have enough nurses to do everything. I think it's worse now. It's harder now in nursing.
Yeah.
But back then, a lot of concerns about workflow, errors in technology, right? So, and then, so part of the solution was bringing the key stakeholders together and making them part of the process, right? It's people are gonna hard to dictate change like that, especially that's organizational wide or culture change for the organization. So we needed the leadership of the organization to buy into the process, that this was something that the organization and its leaders stood behind and wanted to do. I was one of the key leaders for that initiative to put that system in. That's how I came in as a consultant. And, it was an interesting situation where initially I wasn't an employee too. So it made it even harder. Right. And so I had no direct line authority. I couldn't order my staff to go do things. Right. So I had to sit in a room and convince others that this is what we needed to do. So it was making them part of the process. And another Disneyism that I'll throw out there was, do not let perfection be the enemy of good. Right. So we were trying to get this system live, and they were just, and we were chasing zero errors. Right. So this was a good lofty goal. And difficult project, tons of data. We had IT, pharmacy, nursing involved. And there was fear of putting the system live, because what if we didn't think of every situation we could have possibly before the system goes live and run through every single scenario? So we got to a point where perfection was becoming the enemy of good. I knew as a pharmacist, and some in our nursing leaders knew, that every day we were making mistakes in some way, shape, or fashion. A lot of them benign, right? But occasionally some that could cause patient harm. So we had to make a commitment and a jump to do that. And I remember when we brought the system live with, and we had our chief nursing officer there, of course the senior leadership's there, right? We flick on our first unit, and we started small, because one of the things we also realized is that we, as hard as we tried and as thorough as we were, we cannot predict every situation possible. Right. And we knew after our go live of our first unit, we would learn things, and then make the product and process better before we move on to the next unit and continually improve. Right.
Yeah.
So we agreed that was also going to be our rollout methodology. Right. Then we're going on the first unit, and and that was one of the units that was really hard to work with too. They were very demanding, very much perfection seeking. And within the first hour, with the chief nursing officer there and senior leadership, a nurse comes up and scans the C, and like, I told you this system's not going to work. It's causing an error. It won't let me finish this med administration. Nurse was going on and on. I said, wait a minute, it's stopping us for a good reason. Let's take a look. Turned out the nurse had the wrong medication.
Wow.
Right? So, right, it was like, that was like a big aha moment. So some, the stakeholders, some of the people that had the biggest concerns, made part of the process, saw what the system could do, then became our biggest advocates in the organization.
Right.
And then when we rolled those improvements from area to area and drove those, we tweaked things. We did, a post-project go live of a unit, what went well, what didn't, kind of like a SWOT analysis. And took those lessons learned and made the next rollout better. And then we took the same process and made the next rollout better. And then we got pretty good. And, fast forward, nursing colleagues and I were giving presentations at national conferences about the benefits of barcode scanning, right? Because we had put together a really good system. So, and people have conflicting agendas, because it's like, what's in it for me, right? I call it WIFMs, right? So you have to kind of align WIFMs. And there's going to be people that are going to be very supportive. There's going to be people that are in the middle. They don't care if this succeeds or fails.
Right.
And there's going to be people that will just be naysayers the entire time. So I think knowing where people fall into those camps, try to get champions, make people part of the process, and move towards the greater good. Right. I think is how you try to blow through some of those things. But it's always fun. That's always fun.
It's such a great note to end this on. I want to add one component, which is that the barcoding system is exactly what could have prevented the big tragedy. I think it was Vanderbilt, but I can't remember the hospital, where a nurse recently, I think she lost her license, and there was a felony because she chose the wrong med, and I believe the patient died. And an absolute tragedy, obviously, but the idea being that you were implementing systems that could have helped and have hopefully helped in preventing some of those tragedies. There's a whole discussion to be had on med errors, and we should probably have you back to talk about med errors. But that I'm pretty sure that could be a series all by itself.
No, you're right. But I think it is kind of paying attention to the process, listening to key stakeholders, bringing in that expertise, gaining leadership support is key. Like if we didn't have leadership support, and I would call it air cover, right? We needed some air cover from time to time to kind of move things forward. So it's a combination of those things, regardless of the process. But yes, I think two comments on that with that error that you spoke about. I don't know which organization was exactly, but it is, people are human, and, unless someone's purposefully doing something there are two victims in a medication error, usually the patient and the provider who helped, or, was part of that medication error. Both suffer, honestly. So I think there's a balance between prosecution and improving processes that sometimes tilts one way or the other.
I struggled with that one judgment. On one hand, as a healthcare provider, I couldn't begin to count how many mistakes I've hopefully made that didn't matter, but I know I've made my share of mistakes. So it's incredibly hard for me to go, yes, prosecute her. And on the other hand, if that was me on that bed, if that was my mom on that bed, I would struggle with that as well. So I don't think there's a right answer, but like you said, there are two victims. So
yes, yeah, agreed. Agreed. That could be another talk, Darshan. I know you just line them up here. You can have lots of talks.
So let me sort of end this on a positive note. So two things. Number one, I do want to clarify for those people who might just be listening. Tom and I are not speaking on behalf of our employers and or our clients. So just want to mention that and put that out there. You can also reach Tom via email at tsiepka@c3aco.org. You can also find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or go to my website at darshantalks.com. Or if you want to find someone like me as a lawyer, you can find my website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. And Tom, this was amazing. One last question for you before we go. What would be, well, actually two questions. The first one, did we get the other 2 points that you said we hadn't gotten to?
No, but we can end on them though. I think.
That'd be perfect. Why don't you end on that?
So I think one of the things that you do as a leader, you need to do is be accountable. You provide feedback, and really a big ism with that is and this is a Quint Studerism, right? Great leader that really espoused great patient engagement and improving care and relations is what you permit, you promote. And as a leader, you're going to be very mindful of that. And it's all about being, accountable, providing people feedback and being careful. Because if you allow things that you're just busy and you say, well, I'll address that later, but a bad behavior or something goes on, people take note of that. And then as they'll say, as a leader, they don't care because they're not addressing that. So you always be mindful of that. And last, and maybe a positive one, Darshan, is take time to celebrate, right? There's so many times I would say in the last 5 years too, in healthcare with all the craziness with the pandemic and financial pressures, is that you run from one initiative or project to another. And there's no time taken in between to really acknowledge work that is done, celebrate achievements and goals that are met. And I think that's dangerous not to do that, because what will happen is you'll get caught into a cycle and you can end up burning out really great people they have on the team. So take the time to pause, take the time to say thank you, and take the time to celebrate with your team because it was a team accomplishment, right? You just had the privilege of working with that group and leading them, but it was without the team, it wouldn't happen. So that's I think how we ended on a positive note.
I'm going to unfortunately ask you to add one more positive note to this because Lydia has one more minor question. I did put that on, but can you please repeat your email slower?
Sure. So it is T Siepka. So there we go. Thank you, Darshan. It's on the screen, but TSIEPKA @c3aco.org. That's my work email. I'm here to speak as a pharmacy leader, not really for my organization, but that's a great way to reach me because I'm always on my work email. So any questions or follow-up, feel free to reach out. But thank you for the time today, Darshan. It was always a pleasure to speak with you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you again, Tom.